So the first thing is, let's look at the forms of communication. And I'm sure most of you will be familiar with the first principle of the one-way model of communication. And this is obviously based upon the idea that we have a source for a particular message who encodes a message in a particular format that is they think is relevant to the receiver. They then send that message through a signal in various forms, and the receiver then decodes that signal. The effectiveness of this particular model is dependent upon a number of variables, one of which is that the source understands the receiver and that the receiver has sufficient information to be able to decode the message. So therefore signs and symbols and words are all going to be very important for us in order to understand the communication that's in flow. And of course the flow is one way. It's a one-way form of communication. The communication is enhanced by what are known as realms of understanding. The more the source, for example, Procter & Gamble, understand about their a particular target market, the more likely the communication is going to be successful. And of course, if the receiver has sufficient understanding of the range of products and purposes that they're interested in, the more likely they are going to be understand or attribute meaning to the communications they receive. All these communications are subject to noise. That's my little signal for noise, all right? Innovation. These squiggles represent noise in the system. Noise is, or noise can prevent us decoding, understanding, and attributing the right meaning to a message. So therefore, noise can be somebody phoning as the message is being transmitted and understood. It could be background noise, literally noise in terms of decibels, or it could be confusing signals associated with double meaning associated with particular words. There is some feedback. Not a lot necessarily, but there are opportunities for some feedback to these particular forms of communication. And the most obvious form of communication is broadcast TV ads. Yes, it's one way. We're sitting there, hopefully, receiving the message, and we have very little opportunity to feed back on that message. Now, that's the one-way model. I'm now going to introduce the influencer model, where we have a message source that sends communications to target audience 1, target audience TN. Now, the message goes in the one-way model from the source to target audience 1, but unfortunately, some of the audiences don't receive that message. The message is interrupted. It's blocked. They don't receive it from the source. What they do is perhaps receive messages from influencers. And there are two types of influencers, opinion leaders and opinion formers. Opinion leaders are unofficial experts, people who have knowledge, informal knowledge and qualifications, if you like, about a particular topic that they're interested in. They are more than willing to share that knowledge with members of their peer group. And here, of course, we have word of mouth in action. Opinion formers, on the other hand, are people who have formal qualifications, formal expertise in their particular topic, and they are often paid to communicate with target audiences about a particular topic. So, journalists are opinion formers. Yeah? Jeremy Clarkson is an opinion former. These people can be identified because of the formality of the communications. Now, what organizations do, of course, is they stream information to identified opinion leaders and encourage them and enable them to communicate with their peer group. A bit like Twitter is a form of this that's emerging now. But of course, opinion leadership has been around for a very, very long time. It's just we have digital options today. The next model is the response model of communication, and what we've got here is the one-way model, but now we're getting or enabling the recipients to respond to the communication that they have received. So what we have is the receivers become the source of the next leg of the communication process. So now we can identify that receivers and sources, and people like you and me and millions of other people, have the opportunity to join in the communication process. It's a response model. Partly because of digitalization, interactivity has now become much more commonplace and a much more potent form of communication. Interactivity can be mediated through technology, which is what we refer to, but we mustn't forget that there is interaction through human forms as well. Personal selling, for example, has a very close form of interaction, which very often we forget about when we're looking at interaction. But interactivity itself is the bedrock through which relationships can be developed with either consumers or businesses. It's a critical activity. And interactivity is starting to be researched in much more detail, and I've chosen the work of Johnson and et al. Here, who list out 4 dimensions of interactivity. We've got reciprocity, responsiveness, the speed of the response, and the exchange of non-verbal information in an interaction. Now, I'm not going to go into the detail associated with the dimensions of interactivity because that's really beyond what we need to do today. But I just do want to raise to the surface ideas about interaction. It's just not a linear perspective of interactivity. It's much more complex. And the more we understand about these dimensions, the more likely we're going to be successful with our communication activities. Interaction is concerned with response, yes. But a response may not be coherent, it might not be accurate or helpful or even topical, yes? You could have people shouting at each other on a railway station, neither of them knowing exactly what the other one is trying to convey to the other, but it is a response. What we need to move on from response is to an interaction where there is some understanding of what the other person is talking about. Dialogue emerges from interaction and occurs through mutual understanding, and Ballantyne refers to this as a reasoning approach, a shared approach to interaction, learning together, as he phrases it. And the point I want to make is that interaction and dialogue can be developed through marketing communications, and they are the linchpin of the form and type of relationships that emerge. So bringing all these things together, we can see that there are a range of communication forms, or forms of communication. One-way communication, influencer communication, response-based, interaction, and then finally dialogue. So at one end of the spectrum, we have essentially one-way communication, and at the other, we have dialogue. Yeah?